Jessica at the lovely Scott County Public Library in Georgetown, Kentucky, with another edition of our Facebook Bookends. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite genres of books, that is historical fiction. And I read these all the time because I just can't get enough of history. And my guest today is Hannah. She's one of my coworkers, and she's got a whole list of books to talk about too. So let's just jump right in.
All right, let's do it.
This is my first book I'm going to discuss today. It's called Picture Maker by Penina Keen-Spinka. And I love this book because it covers so much historical ground and covers so many different cultures. Because our main character, whose name is actually Picture Maker, she's born into a Native American clan and develops a skill for making prophetic drawings. And one of her drawings predicts a war that is going on between her family's tribe and another tribe. And actually during that war she's captured and taken prisoner and becomes a servant in the other tribe's, one of their families. And she's forced into servitude, and they treat her so poorly that she actually tries to get away from them. But she's separated from getting back to her original tribe because she'd have to go through a whole bunch of warring areas. So she actually tries to go a different way, and she ends up sheltering with an Inuit family. And eventually she actually marries a man from Greenland and goes back to Greenland with him. So it covers all those different cultures and explains how they all work from an outsider's perspective, which is very fascinating to me. And I highly recommend this book. It's got wonderful characters, and you learn so much about history with that. So again, Picture Maker by Penina Keen-Spinka. And my next book that I'm going to talk about is called Triangle, and it's by Catherine Weber. It's about the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, which was the major manufacturer of women's blouses back in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. And in 1911, there was a major disaster at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company in which hundreds of mostly women perished in the flames. And that was because of the labor practices at the time. They locked the doors when the women were in there working. So some of them kind of reminiscent of what happened on September 11th when people were jumping out of the windows of the World Trade Center. These women would jump to their deaths from this burning multi-story building because they didn't have fire engines with ladders tall enough to reach them. And because of this disaster, actually labor laws were changed, and some of the fire engine elements of firefighting were changed in order to protect people. But there's a mystery also woven into this book where they're not sure exactly why this woman, Rebecca Gotsfield, she's not sure exactly why her grandmother was one of the ones to survive this fire. And it's also the story of the reporter that is trying to get to the bottom of this story, because she's an historian as well and wants to know exactly what was going on. So it's a very fascinating book. I highly recommend it. Triangle by Catherine Weber. If you really, really, really want to go in depth back in time, I don't have these books to show you here because we don't have physical copies of them in the library, but you can get them on Hoopla through our library. Is the Alexander Trilogy by Mary Reynold. And the first one covers Alexander's early years, and that's called Fire from Heaven. And the second one is from when his father has been assassinated, and he takes over the reins, and he's just starting out to get his empire going, and that's called The Persian Boy, and that one covers him up until he dies. And then the third one covers the aftermath of Alexander's death, and that's called Funeral Games. So if you really want to go back in time, you will feel like you have been living through this period in history, because this author is so good about transporting you to another culture that you will feel that you are actually immersed in it. So I highly recommend that. If you're into Westerns, you can't go wrong with Louis L'Amour. Wonderful characters. I can't say enough about them. They're positive, upbeat. They do have bad guys in them.
Yeah, but it's a Western. You have to have a bad guy.
You have to have a bad guy. And the thing that I like about Louis L'Amour is that his main characters always know right from wrong, and they judge people on the quality of their character, not by external appearances.
Right.
So I recommend that. And Sackett, that I recently read, is right smack in the middle of his long Sackett series that follows the same family from I think it's the 1600s, something like that, all the way up to the late 1800s. So if you're interested in Westerns, give Louis L'Amour a try. Yeah. We've got some that I think we're going to talk about at the end, the Kentucky Pack Horse Library books.
Yeah. Do you want to just do that now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
Why not?
I think this is our Troublesome Creek, right?
Yes. The Bookwoman.
The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek. And Jessica has not read this one yet. She actually just got it, and I did the audio version of it, and I will say that for me, in an audiobook, you have to have really great narrators, otherwise I don't think I can hang in there very long. That one was really, really great. And I had not heard of the Pack Horse Library until I read that book. And the other interesting fact from this book is that the woman that's on the Pack Horse Library is one of the Blue people of Eastern Kentucky. And so that's a really different, interesting twist that's thrown into it, and essentially the racism that comes along with that. Because even though people knew that there were Blue people in Eastern Kentucky, they weren't exactly accepted at that time. So it's really, really well written. And just on a personal note for me, my grandfather grew up in Eastern Kentucky, and after I read that book, I got very curious if he had ever had that experience. Unfortunately, my grandfather died in 2012, so I couldn't ask him. So I mentioned it to my dad, who said that he remembers my grandfather talking about the Pack Horse librarians, and they didn't come to his home, but they brought books to the school. So I thought that was really neat, and I wish that I had, had the opportunity to learn about it earlier so that I could have talked to him about that. But I thought that was really a cool thing. So, since you have not read it, I guess but it's definitely a highly recommend, and I think you've been waiting on that one for a little while now. Right. It's been pretty popular.
Yeah, I read The Giver of Stars, which is also, that one's by Jojo Moyes. And that one's also about the Pack Horse Librarians of Kentucky, which I just find it's fascinating Kentucky history as well as being a good read.
Yes, that one was very good as well. And I really like the character progression of the main female character in that one. I believe her name was Alice, and she was British, and she comes into America, and not just into America, but into the hills of Eastern Kentucky. So it's a completely different, a big change for her. And I really enjoyed that one as well. And the nice thing about those two books is even though they are centered on the Pack Horse Library, they're completely different storylines, and they just move very well, and they're really good reads. So, well, I guess I will jump in. I have two. Unfortunately, I only have one sitting up here because the other one is popular and it has been checked out. But I have two by Lisa Wingate. And the reason I'm kind of presenting them both together is because they're actually written very similarly. And what Lisa does when she writes these books, the first one is Before We Were Yours, and the other one is called The Book of Lost Friends. And she will write a parallel story. So there will be a modern day person, and the Book of Lost Friends is actually set in the 80s, I believe it was 1987, and that was focused on a high school teacher. And then at the same time, you'll go to say like the next chapter, and they will tell you the story, and that one was set post-Civil War. And so there was these 3 young ladies that are traveling around the South, and they're trying to find a man, and he is the father of 2 of them, and he was actually the owner of one of them. So not to give too much away, but they're basically telling that story, and the true element of that was that these girls were writing down people's stories. So if somebody had lost somebody, been separated from them through the war, anything like that, the slaves that had been sold and been separated from their families, they would write down these people's information, and then they would print that in a newspaper so that the families could read that and then hopefully become reunited. So that was a true thing that happened. So obviously with these girls in the story are fictional characters, but they were speaking of something that was real. And then in the modern day story, the school teacher was helping her students to uncover their ancestry and how they were related to the Book of Lost Friends. And then in the Before We Were Yours, which is this one focuses on the Tennessee Children's Home. And I had not heard of the Tennessee Children's Home, and it has it's just a horrible, it really is just a terrible story. Basically, and this is the true part of it, is that children were being kidnapped and taken away from their families and then adopted out under new names, and the families were forced to pay a big sum of money, and then they were swindled out of more money because the people would come back to them and say, the family's now fighting for custody, you're going to have to pay us this much so we can cover your court costs.
Oh, wow.
And that wasn't happening because the families had no idea where their children were. And in some cases there were kids that were actually just grabbed off the side of the road walking to school.
Oh,
and those were the true events of that. But both of those books by Lisa Wingate, The Book of Lost Friends and Before We Were Yours, really good reads. There's a little bit of sadness in there, but they're really, really well written.
Wow.
So, what other book would you like to discuss?
I think we've about discussed it all for today, but historical fiction, I highly recommend it. I think it's one of my favorite genres.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find them on Hoopla, you can find them on Overdrive, and you can find them in the stacks here at the Scott County Public Library. So until next time.